On Story is brought to you in part by the Alice Clayburgh Reynolds Foundation, a Texas family providing innovative funding since 1979. On Story, presented by Austin Film Festival, a look inside the creative process from today's leading writers and directors. In this week's On Story, a conversation with the creator of Lost and the screenwriter behind Prometheus and Star Trek, Damon Lindelof.
I get inspired by stories that don't do the math for me. Those are the kind of stories that I like to tell. Stories that leave a lot to the imagination so that when they're over, you can kind of fill in the gaps yourself. I am really driven by the untold story in the context of much larger mythologies.
This episode, Damon Lindelof discusses his hand in some of the most celebrated and scrutinized works of science fiction over the past 10 years.
One of the things that we were really, really interested in and passionate about and crazy enough to take on was this idea of purgatory. It was very much in the DNA of the show from the word go. At the end of Tabula Rasa, which is the first episode after the pilot, Jack and Kate are sitting on the beach, and he says to her, you know, we all died in that plane crash. You know, this is our opportunity to start over. And he's speaking metaphorically, although the audience sort of caught on. And the question that we got asked most often over the course of the first season, in addition to the other big questions, are you making it up as you go along, was is this purgatory?
3 days ago, we all died. We should all be able to start over.
Once we started having a conversation with the fan base, we were like, no, this is all really happening. This is not going to be an incident at Owl Creek. This is not purgatory. And so what we said was, but what we're going to do is we're going to take on a question that nobody expects us to take on, and we're going to answer that. And let's shoot for what happens when you die. Yeah. Let's go for that one. Let's present our version of an afterlife. We didn't call it the sideways in the writers' room. We referred to it as the bardo, which for those of you who've read the Tibetan Book of the Dead, it's essentially a concept where when you die, you don't know you're dead. It's sort of like Bruce Willis in The Sixth Sense, and your journey is about coming to the revelation that you have died. And once you come to the revelation that you have died, then you are ready to move on. One of the things that's enormously challenging and frustrating, and you guys, for those of you who watch Lost, were on this journey with us as writers, is what am I working towards? What's the ending of this thing going to be? This entire construct was really personified by the flashback storytelling nature of the show. So if you were talking about Lost to someone who had never seen it in those first two or 3 years, you'd say, well, every episode is an episode where these guys are having these adventures on this crazy island, but every episode just takes one character and tells kind of this little New Yorker short story about them before the crash. And so we're getting to kind of know these things about them. Sometimes those stories are mundane. Sometimes those stories are revelatory. The first season, every time we did a character's first flashback, it was like, oh my God, you know, Locke was in a wheelchair, or Hurley was a lottery winner. Because these people chose not to speak about themselves at all. But then when you had to do the second, third, fourth Hurley story or Locke story, we had to start exploring new territory. We had this idea already that we were going to start doing flash forwards, that we were going to jump forwards in time to what we called the middle of our Lost story, which is that several of the people in the Oceanic Six were going to get off the island, and then we'd see what their lives were like off the island, and we would dramatize it by these flash forwards. But we can't do that until they give us an end date. Well, the miracle occurred. They gave us the end date, and we pulled the trigger on that idea. We Trojan horsed our first flash forward in the season 3 finale. Mm-hmm. We made it look like yet another, oh my God, Jack is drunk, he's got a beard, he's miserable, it's going to be the same, another one of these. And it turned out to be our first flash forward, which was an enormously exciting storytelling mechanism, because the show, an episode of Lost, is a balance between island storytelling and off-island storytelling. There's two questions that we get asked over and over again as the show was on, and I still get asked. Question number one is, were you making it up as you went along? How much of the show was planned out? And they want the answer to that question to be, we weren't making it up as we went along. We totally had a plan. The plan was rock solid. We had a binder of women.
Yeah, exactly.
Except it wasn't women, it was a plan. And this was our intensive mythology, and that's what we're going to do. That's what they want the answer to question 1B. Question 2, an iteration of what you just said, which is, how much impact do the fans have on the storytelling? Does the audience have? You know, you guys have an ongoing dialogue with the fan base. Can they change or affect the storytelling? And they want the answer to that question to be yes, absolutely. You guys change our minds regularly, and if you have a good idea, we are going to steal it from you and put it into the show. So those are the two answers. Every episode of Lost started with the question of what's it about, and as opposed to answering like, well, this is the one where a boar, you know, comes and trashes Sawyer's tent, and he's got to go chase after it, and then he and Kate play I Never. No. What's it about? Like, what's this episode about? And it's like, oh, this episode is about Sawyer starting to let go of his thirst for vengeance for the man he believes responsible for what happened to his parents. That's what it's about. And then thematically for him, and then there's another level below that, which is it's just basically about forgiving people. That's what this one's about. But I never look at it in terms of projecting, I need everybody to forgive everybody. Like, you know, Carlton and I always joked about Jupe the monkey at the end of every show. There was a monkey on the island that Kitsis and Horowitz named Jupe, and we always joked that if the show got too complicated or got canceled prematurely, we would just cut to, you know, this kind of well-appointed library, and this leather chair would spin around, and there'd be a monkey in a smoking jacket. We'd go, hello, my name is Jupe, and I suppose I have some explaining to do. And then he would talk for however long we needed to explain things. But, you know, but Jupe actually stood for everything that I don't want to do in storytelling, which is I hope that you as an audience can sort of derive what our intention was and what we wanted it to be about, but I can't force that upon anyone. And the great thing about television, particularly because it's so intimate, is you can derive something from it or pull something from it that's intensely personal to you that was not part of our original intention, and I don't ever want to say to you, well, you're wrong. We had been lobbying for an ending of the show almost from its inception, you know, very early on, for the reasons that I talked about before, that we knew we were going to run out of certain levels of storytelling. But more importantly, it's a mystery-based show, and so if you have a mystery-based show and it's an episode of Law and Order, the mystery is resolved by the end of that episode and it feels self-contained and you move on. But for Lost, it was serialized, so we knew that these mysteries needed to have solutions. So we actively started lobbying for an end date of the show. Right at the same time that we got our end date, within the space of about 3 weeks, The Sopranos ended. Yeah. And we were almost unanimous in our love for The Sopranos ending. We just kind of thought it was perfect. And without even realizing why it was perfect, it just was. And that was terrifying too, because it was like, how are we ever going to step to that? in the wake of the Sopranos ending, we started hearing all this negativity surrounding the Sopranos ending from the fan base, which was like, it's a cop-out, what does it mean, did Tony get shot, etc. It's like, you asking those questions defeats the entire purpose of the way that David Chase chose to end it. We started kind of arguing with Sopranos fans, and in the space of that argument, we came to the secondary revelation, which was, there was no ending that we could possibly come up with that was not going to be highly divisive. And once we embraced that idea, we were no longer afraid. I think that in our fan community, you were sort of either a Star Wars guy or a Star Trek guy, or I'm saying guy and I mean guys and girls. But you kind of had to pick one. But what we started to find was that there were a lot of people who defined themselves as Star Wars people who actually kind of really liked Trek too, or at least one of the iterations of it. And so JJ, he said, let's do Star Trek as Star Wars. What's the twin suns moment in Star Trek, in our movie, when on Tatooine in Star Wars, when Luke is just sort of looking out at those twin suns and there's no dialogue at all, and the Williams music is playing and we all understand what's going on in Luke's mind, which is, I want to leave this place. I'm bigger than the, moisture farming. Aren't we all? But I feel like I have a destiny that sort of transcends Tatooine, and so we were literally like, what's the equivalent of that in the Star Trek universe? And we're like, it's Jim Kirk on Earth looking up at the Enterprise being constructed. That's the same thing for us. So let's take that image and start to build the entire movie around that idea. I was driving down Ventura Boulevard in the Valley in Los Angeles, and my phone rang, and my agent said, Ridley Scott's going to call you in 5 minutes. Are you available? And I slammed on the brakes of my car, because that's what you do. And then I pulled over, and I figured I'd be waiting there for about an hour, and then 5 minutes later, my cell phone rang, and it was Ridley, and he wasn't, when you're talking to Ridley Scott, there's no introduction. He's not like, hello, it's Ridley Scott. Perhaps you know me from, Gladiator. No. He's just like, hey, dude, I'm sending you a script. He called me dude. I'd like to know what you think. And I said, okay, cool. And that was the whole conversation. Yeah. So I drove back to my house, and about an hour later, this guy showed up, and he handed me a screenplay. And so I read it, and he didn't tell me what it was going to be, but in anticipation of this happening, and even my reps didn't know what it was, but I had been reading that Ridley was reconsidering or considering re-entering the Alien universe, and I was like, please let that be this. And sure enough, the script that I read was by this guy, John Spates, who I shared a credit with on Prometheus. Rightly so. I really feel like the movie is just as much his as it is mine. And I read it, and I thought it was great. It was very much an Alien prequel. It had all of the things that we would expect from an Alien prequel, with eggs and chest bursters and face huggers and xenomorphs and all that kind of stuff, which I loved seeing. But as I read this, I had no instructions whatsoever, and there was an incredibly engaging idea at the center of it, which was, where do I come from? Who made me? And could I go talk to them? And so I said, I don't think you need any of that stuff until the very ending of the movie. I think it's enough to just basically build this movie around that idea. And I think that there's this really interesting thing happening generationally, where we have the humans who want to find out their origins, who created them, but then you have a robot who's created by humans, and he's like, you're not going to be that impressed when you with your creators, because I think you guys are dingbats. And so for me, I wrote them an email basically saying, I'm going to try to recenter the movie around David, the robot, and I'm going to try to really explore these ideas of who made me and why, and more importantly, what would we say to them, our creators, if we came across them, and what would they do next? That was kind of my pitch in the email, and then I got a phone call the next morning. Ridley now wants to meet you, and so I was terrified and remain terrified of him to this day. My feelings about that movie are very conflicted. Shocker, but I do think that the most memorable scene in the movie, just in terms of pure impact, is when Shaw goes into the med pod and gets this thing out of her, and that was all John. I mean, when he wrote it, it was a chest burster, and she had been infected by a face hugger, and I wanted to change it more towards, have the gestation change a little bit so that it was, her boyfriend gets infected, and then they have sex, and then this is literally her child, and then that child is going to essentially be responsible for bringing about the birth of the first xenomorph. So I really wanted to have some kind of clean genealogy there, but there were a lot of really fantastic ideas in John's script that I didn't want to throw out, and I think a mistake that a lot of writers make when they're rewriting someone else's, they need to make it theirs, as opposed to looking at a piece of material and saying, someone very smart and very talented worked on this for quite some time before I showed up, and they got a lot of things right. And if I can maybe just connect these dots in a slightly different way, maybe there will be success there too. So it was the process of, what do we keep? What do we change? What does Ridley want to do? And then, of course, what does Fox want to do? Because when I came in on the movie, it was not a foregone conclusion that it would get made. And Fox had very specific ideas about what they wanted this movie to be. And so you try to navigate all those things. When you're interested in the kind of storytelling that I'm interested in, which is, it can be very ambiguous, but I choose to look at it as I just want to write up to my audience. And I feel like I'm not interested in spelling things out for them. I want to leave avenues of imagination that are available to them. But I don't want to say that whatever you imagine is what it is. Like, I have an intent. There is in the storytelling that I do a defined, method to my madness.
Hi, my name is Dean Loxton, and I am the writer-director of the short film Metro 7B. I wanted to make a film about love, and I remember when I was at school, there was a woman who used to stand outside her house as if she was waiting for someone. And later on I learned that her son had passed away, and that she was waiting for him every day as if he might come home. And it was this kind of love that really inspired me to make the film. What I would like people to kind of take away from this film is just not to judge a book by its cover. Well, I hope they go on a journey. I hope they're moved. And I hope maybe they're reminded of that great love is possible, or a great love that they've had in their lives. So coming up is my film Metro 7B. Thank you for watching.
Excusez-moi, monsieur. Oui, il y a un problème? Non. Pourquoi vous regardez ma meuf comme ça? Ah, pardon. Ouais. Pardon. Je suis désolé. Je me suis permis. Vous êtes anglaise?
Oui, mais je suis là pour parler français.
J'ai cru entendre.
C'est ma première fois ici.
Première fois à Paris?
Ouais.
Wow. Pour les vacances?
Ah non, je viens pour pratiquer mon français.
Vous connaissez pas du tout Paris alors?
Non.
Si vous voulez, on peut... Enfin, je veux bien vous accompagner pour faire un tour.
Pourquoi pas?
Très bien. Tout va bien.
Normalement, je fais pas ce genre de choses.
T'inquiète pas.
Faut que j'y aille.
Non, reste. S'il te plaît. Reste avec moi. Faut que je te dise quelque chose. Je suis avec quelqu'un. S'il te plaît, laisse-moi t'expliquer. Je suis désolé, je l'aime comme un fou. Elle est malade, tu comprends? Je l'ai rencontrée il y a 10 ans dans le métro, c'était son premier jour à Paris. Il y a 6 mois, elle a eu un accident de voiture. Tous les jours depuis, elle revit la même journée. Le jour de notre rencontre, son premier trajet dans le métro. Je suis obligé de la séduire comme la première fois. Elle m'a oublié. Tu m'as oublié. Je t'aime.
Bye.